Few COVID don't knows, or did you know, shall I call them? First one is obviously, you've all heard this one, is that we had our first ever 0 daily COVID death yesterday. So no deaths to report yesterday, which is fantastic news. First time since March 2020 when the whole thing began. So it's certainly seeing progress. As to whether that will actually impact upon our escape plan for later this month, who knows? We'll see what happens. A COVID rescue plan to help children in England catch up on lost lessons, which will cost about 1.4 billion, has been unveiled by the government today. But the plans that they wanted to originally introduce, which is to extend the school day from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. or even 6 p.m., those have been postponed for now. For those of you who have teenage 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds in your household, many sympathies for you. You've got another year of it because they've got the option to basically do their exams again if they want to now. So the government said, look, if you did screw up, you do feel that actually COVID's affected your results, and you can retake your exams and spend another year enjoying the bank of mum and dad. Other little known fact is that there's been an increase in the number of car accidents in the UK since the relaxation in ability to move around. 30% rise in insurance claims in the last month alone compared to the beginning of 2021. Interestingly enough, since the rules were relaxed in mid-April, the number of people on the roads has increased exponentially, and as a result of which, obviously, we're seeing a much higher proportion of accidents, particularly accidents, it says, taking place in car parks and on motorways. I have to confess that I actually managed to stick my car into a barrier in the car park, a well-known supermarket last week, rather embarrassingly. So I'm on that statistic. Never mind. So back to focus on what today's about. We're going to be talking about content, from the planning of content, the creation of content, the management, and indeed the measurement. Things are changing quite quickly. I've assembled what I regard as a first-class panel of content providers, authors, reauthors, videographers, and voice and podcast specialists. So it's a very warm welcome to the Pimento clan today. First up, we've got Rebecca Danner. For those that don't already know Rebecca began her career in the media industry, 20 years working for media owners such as The Guardian, IPC Media, and Viacom in both creative and sponsorship roles. The last 10 years, she's been helping clients thrive with engaging content as a commercial content writer. Her work for both agencies and clients includes blogs, articles, and white papers, website content, social media, brand messaging and video scripts, and training and upskilling teams. Jonathan Ashworth, there you are, sir. Good to see you, is the founder and creative director of Mighty Giant, an animation and motion design studio based in Manchester. He has over 20 years experience. He's worked for the Beeb, music and advertising. He's worked in London's Adland and founded Mighty Giant in 2010 before moving the company back home to Manchester. The company enjoys helping other creatives bring their ideas off the page and into life. Gav Matthews is an award-winning audio creative producer that's been working across the audio content space for the last 2 decades. After managing programming, creative and production teams across the radio sector for companies such as Global Radio, he launched the creative audio company Couleur in 2008 and now works with brands and agencies to produce engaging radio campaigns, branded podcasts, and digital audio content. And Charlie Hunt is the founder of Proof Content, a content marketing agency that she set up, wasn't so long ago actually, must have 6 years ago now? It's been longer. We've known each other. Anyway,
I think it's 8.
8, God, some time flies. She recently won a Beamer 100 award for her work in the AI and content space. So we'll be talking about AI today, looking at ways of providing SEO and e-commerce content on a large scale using AI and data. Proof Content creates data-driven content using a combination of in-house teams and a network of over 150 freelancers around the world. Amy Woods. Amy is an expert in content repurposing and the founder of Content 10X, a niche creative agency. She helps content creators grow their audiences by maximizing their return on their content they create. She works with businesses, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders, and is the content repurposing powerhouse behind some of the world's best-known podcasts and video shows. So there you have it. I mean, a real great lineup of really strong people in their own space, but unitedly, they're able to cover the whole spectrum of content as it is now. I'm going to kick off with a few questions and sort of try and work it around the panel if I may. What I'm probably going to do is I'm going to bring the panel all in and to highlight them. In fact, Molly, could you do that for me? Could you basically pull the panel into the center stage? And the first question I'm going to ask is of Rebecca Danner. Rebecca, what's new in the world of content?
I think there's a lot. Content's certainly been developing. I think visual forms of content is huge now. With the emergence of TikTok over the last couple of years, Instagram Reels, obviously dominance of YouTube. So that visual storytelling is incredibly important when you're thinking about your content. There's a study by Social Insider who talks about the tap-through rate. So obviously the number of people who tap in to advance their screens. It's 5.65% higher for images than it is for video. So it just shows how important video is. But I think what's really key is looking at that EAT, so EAT. So looking at expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness in any content. So really earning that trust, but looking at that kind of higher quality, purposeful content. So not having that content churn anymore, that doesn't work. You've really got to invest time in writing good quality content and really understanding your customer. So that kind of ultra targeted, very customer first content in order to build trust, and really work thinking about things like how you can offer guidance, help, information and entertainment, but without a big sell, because that just turns people off. So it's really building that trust, understanding your consumer, and purposeful content gets that cut through nowadays.
Let's hope you take yourself off mute. I concur with that. I think the one thing I've really noticed, and this is a question for Amy, is that the sort of breadth of content and the quality of content now is so much higher than it was, say, 5 years ago. Amy, what's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it used to be a bit more of a volume play and just getting lots and lots and lots of content out. And there's so much content going out at the moment that there's so many people consuming content that it's way more a quality play. So we're seeing, certainly with, the clients that we work with, a lot more time and effort put into really core pieces of cornerstone quality pieces of content. And then, the repurposing of that into the short form content. So into like visuals or shorter pieces, tweets, Twitter threads, things like that, but stemming from, really quality content, because it's way more a quality play than a volume play now, for sure, to stand out with your content.
Thank you. Johnny, I mean, you're very much obviously at the sort of sharp end of content creation. What sort of animation and video type work are you now doing for clients? Has that changed?
Yeah, definitely. I think echoes what Rebecca was saying before, which is we're working a lot more on sort of pieces that brands want to do for their existing customers, where it's to sort of help them with the product. So, for example, we did a piece for Jaguar Land Rover about 2 or 3 years ago. Bizarrely, was a sort of 2-minute piece about how to sit in your car, which I never realised we needed advice on. But 500,000 views on that about sort of how to avoid back pain when you're sat in the cars and things like that. They're willing to invest what was a significant amount of money to do a very detailed 3D piece of animation for that. They're not really going to make any sales through that because it's sent out to their existing customers that are already in the car. But they obviously see the value in doing that for their customers and reflecting back on their brand.
And Gavin, you obviously you witnessed the change in the audio part of the content play. I mean, and I don't know, 5 years ago you'd imagine you'd be producing audio files for social and so on. Has that come naturally, or is it actually have you had to adapt your proposition and how you go about managing that sort of content?
I think for us, I think we've always known the job and the role that audio content can do, but I think it's within the space of brands. They've taken a few years to kind of catch up with that. I think 2020 was kind of the year it felt that the branded podcast was a thing that everybody understood now, and kind of understood how to use the space better, and we're kind of seeing a lot of investment this year from brands in that space. So it has changed, and I think how people are using that content has changed. I think also there was an interesting campaign at the start of the year from the Open University, who were one of the first I knew to rather than have a campaign and have a podcast to accompany it, the podcast was the campaign, and the majority of the budget kind of went there, and then they built the campaign around it to focus on that. So I think that's quite interesting, and I think more and more brands now are looking at the huge numbers of listeners and the volume, you know, every week, and how best to use that space, really.
So we've, in summary for this part of this session, we're saying that basically the media channels are evolving quite rapidly, and people are using particularly animation, they're using audio in a different way to perhaps what they were doing a few years ago. That actually quality is now coming ahead of quantity, and then people are investing more money in the quality and the creation of their content. I'm told, Charlie, and you'll have to tell me a little bit more about this, is there's kind of been an emergence of celebrity business owners becoming influencers as a result of this. You know, they've established their own channels and they're now doing it properly. Can you talk to that for me?
Yeah, I think especially in B2B, I mean, people buy from people. So I think that's really important. But actually with B2C as well, with the rise of stories and this kind of everyday, you know, YouTubers and stories as well, I think people are just much more interested in the workings behind a business. So actually, even if you're I don't know, you're selling office equipment, there's kind of more of an interest in how you run your business and who are the people behind that business. And actually that is proving really, really effective.
That kind of leads us on to talk about purpose, I guess, and actually the fact that actually people are only willing to buy from people who actually they believe to actually either have common values or have a point of view, or are, shall we say, consistent in actually what they're saying and what they're actually doing. Are there any brands in particular you witnessed recently, and this is to everyone, that have actually kind of got the purpose piece completely wrong and have actually gone out there with content that's kind of counterproductive?
I think we see it a lot in fast fashion. I don't want to mention any names, but I think we see it a lot in fast fashion when there's this mention of sustainability. And I think actually that's what we're having a problem with at the moment, and a backlash, and what consumers are having a backlash against is people saying that their ranges are eco-friendly or sustainable, or I think there's a lot of mention of purpose and things. And actually, are they? No.
I think it's, people can spot it when it's hollow a mile off, and also it'll get picked up in the media. I mean, if a journalist can pick something up like that, they will do, and then it will be exposed. So if you are going to go out with a purposeful message, make sure it's sustainable and it's concrete and you can actually back it up, rather than it be something that's very hollow. And I think we've also seen that going back to kind of the influencer side of content, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, all of those celebrity influencers, you know, the likes of people who've been on Love Island or whatever, those sorts of people who were obviously being paid to promote product, that became so fatuous at the beginning of the pandemic that there was a huge backlash against that. And actually people now see massively through those sorts of people, and they want to hear from people who really do have that level of expertise, who they can trust, and they see the actual evidence of what they're talking about just generally, because like Charlie was saying, there's so much more insight, that kind of behind the scenes type of content, that you can see much more than just the initial brand that you used to be able to see a number of years ago. So I think it's just understanding that if you want your brand to be seen a certain way, make sure you can 100% back it up in everything.
As a build on that, and this one for Amy, I think, you know, mortgaging your brand to third-party influencers is a necessity when you actually don't have an audience yourself. I mean, because of the way the Facebook algorithm works and the fact they limit the number of views and so on, you don't have much choice unless you start spending huge amounts of money on paid social. So what techniques do you employ, you know, that takes existing client content to get it repurposed and to get it out to larger audiences?
Well, so I guess it's really interesting what we're talking about in terms of like CEOs and founders putting themselves at the forefront of the business, as Charlie said, and then like let's look at Stephen Bartlett, the CEO of Social Chain. Of course, he's gone on to be this huge personal brand. He's going to be on Dragon's Den. There's Ben Francis, the CEO of Gymshark, and he does lots and lots of content, and he's got more followers than Gymshark, and so on. Elon Musk has more followers than Tesla and all these businesses put together. So it is really important to if business CEOs, founders, and the leadership team feel comfortable to put content out, to do that. But then, of course, how do you build the audience? Like, how do you do that, and how do you get people to follow you? So I think it comes back to the quality pay. So how we work with people, we say focus on one form of content. So don't try and do absolutely everything. Don't launch that podcast, have that weekly video show, have 3 blog posts a week, do a live stream, do a webinar. Like, don't try and do everything. We say focus on one core channel and try and grow an audience in that regard. So try and grow that podcast, or try and grow that YouTube channel, and completely focus on that and build the audience there. But then when you have that quality content, so you have those awesome YouTube videos or those great podcast episodes, that's when you look to repurpose, because not everybody listens to a podcast, not everybody watches videos. So you're really going to restrict your audience if you put all your eggs in one basket and only leave it in that medium and in that location, because there's so many other people out there that could consume that content. So that's when you start repurposing it. So you can take that video and you can turn it into shorter, bite-sized social media videos, and take it off YouTube and get it fit for Instagram, fit for LinkedIn, fit for TikTok, wherever your audience is. You can extract quotes, you can create images, you can write blog posts based on the video, and and so on, infographics, whatever can come out of it. But our thing is focus on one medium, get consistent with that, do it in a weekly or whatever episodic way that you can create it, that your audience knows when it's going to come out, what it's going to be like, because you grow followers through consistency, because people are more likely to subscribe to you if you are consistent. They're more likely to tell other people about you because of the consistency, and you know what you're going to get. You build trust and so much more if you do that. And then just have that consistent repurposing to the different locations that you're going to repurpose to as well. And then people will start coming to your longer form content, or they'll just be a fan of your bite-sized content in a different location, but you're still growing an audience there. And then I think it comes back then just to what Rebecca said at the start, of making sure and it's all part of a bigger strategy though. So it's customer driven, and there's a purpose, and there's an action that you want people ultimately to take that grows your business, like the action that you want people to take to convert. So I guess kind of a long-winded answer, but you really just focus on one medium and grow the audience there, and then repurpose that content and have systems and processes to make sure that you do everything consistently, because consistency will win every single time.
Okay, you mentioned, that ultimately relies on obviously working at an ROI and being able to measure, which I'll back to kind of the techniques around measurement in a moment. But you did mention the idea of actually, different formats and editing and creating sort of snippets and so on. Johnny, when you get a brief these days, how different is it to say the brief that you might have had 5 years ago? I get the sense that actually the sorts of things that clients are asking you to do now are different, and actually the time formats and the length, etc. It used to be that when I was looking at this 10, 15 years ago, we'd start with a 60-second TV commercial and edit it down for social. That, I think, has changed.
Yeah, definitely. And I think just sort of on the same point, but following on a bit from what Amy was saying, it's a case of doing less things really well than doing, for example, why would you want 5 2-minute films, spend your budget on 5 long formats that people aren't going to watch as much of, rather than put all that budget into sort of really well produced shorter pieces? And I think as the nature of things going onto social, our briefs are changing in terms of the duration of pieces. They're coming down, but also interestingly, a few years ago we already saw the shift from digital, from TV spend to digital. That's already gone. But now what we're seeing is things which are commissioned, such as in portrait format. So we're having to make, rather than making a 16:9 piece and then cutting it down, we're starting with a portrait piece, which is going to go on Instagram stories. And then it'll get spun out into other formats from there. So the social side is leading on a lot of it. But I think what's interesting for us is that the budget is going towards it, whereas before it was an afterthought and all the money would go into a TV campaign. We're starting to see those budgets shifting towards stuff which will only go on social or will only go online. And it's not necessary that we need to chase the big TV ads to get the big budgets anymore.
As a sort of segue to that, in terms of personalized content development, being highly targeted and thinking much more about your audiences, Charlie, to what extent are you seeing evolutions in that space, or are people still tending to be quite broad in how they attack their target groups?
I think, yeah, it's some companies are quite scared to do it because I think they're worried about alienating some audiences. But ultimately, I think everyone is moving towards right, well, we've got to stand for something and we've got to go after our key audience, and then a few other people might follow. But, you can't be all things to all people. And I think personalization is so important. And now that the tools are becoming kind of cheaper and easier to use and just widely available, we're just seeing, more and more people adopt it.
Arguably, Gavin, for years we've been personalised when it comes to radio and the use of different dialects and actually looking at content on a regional basis and so on and so forth. We've been perhaps more diverse than some other channels. But again, I mean, it still seems to me that actually as a nation, we're incredibly diverse. We tend to communicate in English. Everything is in English. We don't think about the fact that obviously there are X number of different languages spoken in this country, X number of different nationalities, and each of those have have consumer habits, and there's targeting opportunities and wealth creation opportunities. Do you get more briefs of that nature? Do you find that people are wanting to get to be a little bit more diverse in the way they communicate and how they communicate?
Yeah, I think on the commercial side of things, we're very much there. So you can take a digital audio commercial and repurpose that into 15,000 versions upon point of play out. So you can personalize a commercial message down to the individual listener, and in hundreds of different ways. I think in terms of content, the podcast and long form audio content industry is heading there. It's not quite there yet, but there is a movement for podcasts to become more personalized themselves. Google News podcasts now, for example, will look at your search history and kind of see what you're interested in before developing the podcast episode that it plays to you. And there are others that are kind of looking at that. It's kind of not there yet as a mainstream, for brands to say, well, here's our podcast series and this is how we're going to personalize it to different listeners. But it's certainly coming. And I think also what's interesting in the podcast space is the average length of time that someone listens to a branded podcast is 28 minutes. So it's a huge, amount of time that someone gives over to a brand and will spend time with you or with your company. And I think that the tech is now there for users to say, I only have 15 minutes, I only have 10 minutes. And that podcast can just be repurposed just there and then for a shorter version, a bite-sized version. And that's going to be, mainstream as well very soon. So there's lots of ways that the industry is kind of making it better for personalized listening.
And we think about voice in general, Alexa and so on. I mean, the rules are yet to be written, aren't they, in that sort of space? I can only imagine if Alexa basically starts communicating on a personalized basis, it's going to be pretty frightening, isn't it, to begin?
I mean, I think Alexa is fascinating because it landed with us, 4 years or so ago, and everybody thought this is going to change the world. And 4 years on, we're still saying this is going to change the world. And I think the technology is there. I think it's kind of in the hands of advertisers and brands, really. And we've seen a few really nice campaigns where a brand has ran a 30-second audio commercial on radio or Spotify through a smart speaker, asking the user to open an app to find out more. So someone will open the voice app and then have 4 minutes of engagement with the brand in the same voice. And then at the end of that, they can then say, there's a 30-minute podcast to continue this journey. And you can open that from the smart speaker as well. So you can turn 30 seconds into 30 minutes quite quickly. And I think that's quite clever. And I think that's kind of where we're going to see the AI technology really kind of for audio, grow listeners.
Thank you, Garen. You've been using AI a fair amount in the content development side, and it'd be just interesting because I think there's a lot of mystery and mystique around AI in general, but if you can sort of briefly explain how that works and how you're able to produce content in that manner.
Sorry, was that to me, Stephen?
No, it's Charlie.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Stephen. Can you say what you're saying again? I thought you were talking to Gavin.
No, it's build on Gavin's point about the use of AI. I just want to understand exactly how you're using AI in content development, and also just to explain for people that aren't familiar with what AI is. You could just kind of very quickly say what it is and how it works. Okay,
so AI is what we're using it for at the moment is a tool to help us create better content rather than using it to create content. So it's great if you want to find a new way of saying something. It can kind of jumble up words, and it has such a huge, or GPT-3 especially has such a huge data source to take words from. And there are some cases where we've used AI to write content. You have to very heavily edit it. You have to give it a chance to produce like 10 different samples, and then you pick one that's okay. And yeah, so there's definitely some projects there that are coming up. So one of our clients uploads 4,000 products a week to their website, and a human just can't write that much content. So and they're being penalized by Google for having thin content on those pages. So what we're looking at is doing a trial to create content using AI for some of those pages, just to plug that gap in the SEO. But for the category pages, it's really, really important that they all match the tone of voice and they're written by an actual writer. So what we then use for that is, what we'd use AI for those is more the kind of research and then the analysis afterwards as well. And then, sorry, to explain what AI is, it's basically machine learning. So it understands how humans write, and it kind of follows those patterns, but the idea of it being AI is that it can kind of be given a task, but then it sort of thinks for itself, and it's a very difficult kind of thing to explain, but essentially the idea is that eventually it will be doing what humans can do, although I have yet to see that, because there has to be a huge data source for it to pull on, which means it's basically just copying and stitching together other content.
Yeah, and listen, there's always going to be a role for editorial, and as you say, the whole tone of voice issue is yet to be really sort of ironed out. I can also imagine if you have AI content being developed and then actually looking at different language variants, you bring sort of transcreation in with an AI bot in it, that can get very interesting, the output. But yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to see you're already using it and how you're using it, and when to use it and when not to use it. For me, that's really insightful. Okay, let's move on. So I'd like to kind of sort of talk about really the measurement side of content, and actually to what extent each of you is actively involved in demonstrating the added value you're giving to clients, and how you actually go about measuring the impact, and also the sorts of objectives that clients set you up front. So I'm going to sort of work backwards, as it were. So if I start with Amy, who very often you'll be taking content that's not been developed by you, and then you're asked to make it even more successful. What sort of techniques do you use to measure success, and what sort of KPIs are you set?
Yeah, so it is quite an interesting proposition for us, really, because as you said, we repurpose content. I mean, we do have a a different side to the business where we work with businesses to create the original, but predominantly we repurpose other people's content. So it's quite challenging for us to hold ourselves completely accountable to what happens with that content, because it depends how good the content is that we get. They maintain their own strategy, so they need to know who their audience is, plan what their content is, be sure that they're creating the right videos or the right podcast episodes for their audience. And that's when we step in and then take that and turn it into lots of other content. So what we do, we work with the clients in terms of we make them responsible for knowing what their goals are and what they want to achieve, and then they communicate with us as to whether they're hitting those analytics. On social media, we will always say that the what you're looking for is engagement over everything else. So we're looking at whether people are liking, commenting and sharing on any social media content that's going out, if it's the right kind of comments as well. So we're getting the right kind of audiences on those social media, but that's all about engagement. And then, with the blog posts and all of that, that's more about the traffic and the conversion from that traffic and everything. So we get the data from the clients and then, feed off that. We look at whether we think that their strategy is the right strategy, and if the repurposed content isn't working, but it's really quality content, perhaps there's something actually off with the message to begin with in the audience. But yeah, it's if we were in control of the original content, we do an awful lot more in terms of the analytics and the tracking and the looking at what the data is. But because we don't, it's a bit of a funny one, really. And it's quite awkward conversations with clients if the repurposed content is really, really good, but there's some kind of mismatch with engagement, then we have to look to them to say, we think there might be something wrong with your actual strategy and what you're talking about and the audience that you're growing and how that aligns with your business. But for a big thing for us really is that we want to see business growth, and we want to see that their business is growing. So forgetting about likes, comments and shares on social media and forgetting about traffic to websites, if they're getting clients as a result of their content, and that's what they wanted to begin with, they wanted their business to grow, then something good is happening. And that often happens from their podcast, elevating them as a leader in their industry, and they're suddenly getting invited on to other podcasts, they're being asked to go and speak at events, their brand is elevated and they are getting more clients. So then if that's happening, then if there aren't as many likes, comments and shares, but they're speaking at events all around the world and talking on podcasts and being on webinars and getting clients, then something good is happening. So there's qualitative and quantitative outputs of the content that I think is really important to remember.
Thank you. Rebecca, same question I made to you.
Yeah, because I work with both clients and agencies, it will depend quite often from a measurement point of view as to what a client already has or what an agency already has. So quite often I'm tapping into those resources anyway. But like Amy says, there are ways of measuring, with social media, of the analytics, looking at web traffic. But quite often it's quite often what I'm talking to clients about is not necessarily getting really, really het up about numbers, but actually looking at the wider picture in terms of how is the content slotting into all the other activity that they're doing, and actually is it having that end result. So it's maybe sometimes you can't actually 100% measure it because there are so many things going on, but the end result is that the business is growing, or that that you are seeing that level of engagement. And again, it comes down to quality. So it's not necessarily, particularly depending on who the client is or what the business is, it doesn't always have to be that you get huge numbers. It's actually if you get smaller numbers, but they're absolutely business critical to your business growth, that's much more valuable than whether or not 1,000 people have seen it or liked it or, done whatever with it. So it's actually understanding that quality can be so much more powerful and targeted than actually huge numbers. So it's getting that balance right, depending on what your business is, what your industry is, and who you need to talk to. But for me, I can be using so many different measurements, whether it's what a client or an agency already has, or it's something that I've got in place, or using just the analytics that are available to everybody on social channels or on website. So it's for me though, it is always understanding the bigger picture and understanding quality rather than huge numbers.
That makes sense. So, Charlie, I suppose it's really, I guess, in that case, as Rebecca's saying, it's understanding basically the role of that content within the overall marketing mix and your communications strategy, and what you're attempting to do. And it is, as we know, attribution is always a difficult one, but absolutely understand that you need to be really constant of where it is in the customer journey and what part you're fulfilling. A lot of the content you're producing, Charlie, obviously is original content for clients, and I know you focus quite a lot of your time and effort on the travel industry. As a result of COVID, obviously it's been more challenging for everyone, but obviously particularly the travel trade. Have you seen the nature of the content that people have been putting out, particularly since the easing of lockdown, evolve? And just be interested in tonally how things are changing.
In terms of travel? Yeah, so I think there's a lot more focus on kind of information, and kind of how do we explain how we are COVID safe as a business. I think that's been one of the biggest challenges for our travel clients, is how do we get all of this really boring information to see, across to users in an interesting and easy to digest way that will make them feel relaxed by the end and not worried about traveling. And that's even, with UK hotels and B&Bs and things like that. So I guess there's that shift. There's definitely more of a shift towards sustainability in travel, actually. Really interesting few companies popping up around kind of no flying, safaris in Europe, things like that. So that's really interesting and definitely one to watch. And then I think there's also a piece around kind of the purpose behind it. So we're seeing a lot more people kind of talking about how they're supporting the smaller communities that people will visit. So it's not like you just go into this 5-star resort and you're having absolutely nothing to do with the local population, which I think is historically quite often the case. Whereas now it's about what are our initiatives within those communities, and who are the people that are working at those hotels, and how are you kind of supporting them and their communities as well.
Thank you. Okay, listen, I've got a few questions now coming in from our viewers today. First one's from Mark Stoneham. Mark asks, what's the panel's view on Ask the Audience content? In B2B, the potential of polls on LinkedIn is an example that I've found to be very effective. So just some thoughts around that, anyone?
So I recently wrote a piece on why asking questions in content is so useful, because I think now that we have social media and a lot of business owners kind of post on LinkedIn now, and blogs, there's a comment section. So I think it's now more about interaction rather than broadcasting at people. So I think asking questions is a great way to interact with people and understand your customers better.
And I think that really helps then develop your content. So your content's constantly evolving. The more you know your audience, the better your content will be. So really understanding intimately who your audience is, and also how your audience potentially is changing. Maybe your audience is developing as well. So the more you can find out about that, honestly, it's worth the investment. It's worth putting that work in. It's worth following up all the engagement that you get, and really making that part of your strategy. Check in with your audience on a very, very regular basis, and ask some questions, engage with them, discover who they are, know them instantly, and then you can speak to them on a much deeper level. And that comes really down to all behavioral science as well, which is behind good content, is actually understanding how you talk to your audience and how effective you can be by understanding their behaviors and making sure your content reacts to that. So it's really important. It's one of the key cornerstones of good content, understanding your audience.
Rebecca, thank you. Gavin, I see you're keen to say something there.
I just think there's a lot of chats in the kind of podcast space at the moment, how the next stage of growing the podcasting space is about community and is about involvement. And with the birth of Clubhouse, and we're seeing Twitter Spaces and LinkedIn are bringing their audio chats, online. I think you're going to see a lot of podcast content moving to live podcast content, where you can involve your audience and you can build that community. And I think the marketing tools we've used in the last couple of years to grow podcasts, I think, are going to evolve and become more, based on the community that you build and the involvement you have with them. So I think that's something we need to start thinking about, really.
One for you here, Johnny. Thank you very much. This is from Oliver Wilkinson. What do you see as the best, most high-value channels for content moving forward?
I don't think we can discount TV, although I've been talking about the budgets. I still think TV is a player. I think for the right campaign, especially with VOD as well, so you can target it more. But I mean, it's the obvious place, isn't it? For depending on your audience, TikTok. It's so dependent on who's watching. It's certain brands will want to be placed slap bang in the middle of the Masked Dancer if anyone's watching it, and but other people will need to be on TikTok because that's where my daughter's hanging out. So I think it very much depends on your audience, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Can I just add as well? I think it's really important to think about, with a change to the Google algorithm or a change to the social media algorithms, you can lose a lot of your audience overnight. So it's really important to think about that strategy of getting them onto probably an email list is very safe. But it's kind of thinking about how are we communicating with them on lots of different channels, and how are we kind of owning our audience rather than Facebook or Instagram only.
Yeah, I agree. And I think an important thing in the content journey is that we often say to people that you don't need to get everything into the film that we're making for you. It's just the first touch point. So our important thing is to grab people's attention in those first 10, 15 seconds, get them engaged with you. The next step might be that you go online and you check out the website, or you then sign up for the podcast, and then you suck them into the longer form content further along. So it doesn't all have to be in the first touch point.
That's always a good point, and less is very often more. Charlie, on the point you just raised there, and we'll come back to it in a couple of weeks' time, the change obviously in the Google algorithm and the move to a cookieless world, and the next round of GDPR, it's back with a vengeance just when you thought it was safe to come out. I mean, that's really going to affect, I guess, as both our content and also SEO and the need for constant SEO. Given the fact you're actually working on so many different channels now, how do you stay in touch with the latest techniques in SEO? I mean, as content providers, it's kind of a fortunate byproduct of what you do, which is there's a requirement to make sure that actually that content is also driving more viewers. Just in general, again, this goes out to all five of you.
Shall I go? For me, I mean, obviously I understand SEO. I keep abreast of changes, but in terms of me creating content, I work, and I'm sure, I mean, there are members within Pimento who are SEO experts, and it's great to have an overview understanding of it, but actually it's also, I can work very closely with SEO experts, so we work in conjunction with each other, hand in hand, to produce the best possible content, because obviously SEO changes all the time, so you really need an expert to be totally on top of all of those changes, and who can then help guide the content, but obviously you then need a skilled writer to create, or skilled person, whatever the content is, to create the content, so they go hand in hand. So I always will make sure I reach out to SEO experts if they don't already exist within the client or within the agency, to be totally taking on board that they are the experts in it and they can help guide the right content.
I think that's really important. But then on a practical note as well, I think the Search Engine Watch newsletter is pretty good, or the Blue Array SEO, they're an SEO agency, their weekly newsletter. They're also really good ways to kind of keep up to date with SEO.
That's it, Blue Array, and the other one was?
Search Engine Watch.
Search Engine Watch, okay. Yeah, I think this whole conversation today served to demonstrate is that actually content is complex, and there's a lot of thinking that's required around both setting objectives, working out what you can and can't do, what channels you should employ, what medias you should use, and so on. And it's quite interesting when I follow all of the agencies that are part of the Pimento network, and some 200 agencies now. And it fascinates me that actually a lot of them just don't engage in content themselves. Yet they're probably professing to their clients the need and probably creating content for their clients. Can we talk about the sort of role of content in the kind of B2B space in sort of agency land? And how do agencies actually, perhaps what they should be doing now? And where do they start? Because it seems, if you start at sort of Amy's end of the equation, or do you actually have to basically, work out, first of all, what you're trying to do, obviously, with that content and who you're trying to influence and so on? This is, again, it's to any of you. It's complex. Help me.
I would just say oh, sorry, go on, Amy.
No, Gav, you go.
I was just going to say, I think personally, from an audio perspective, it's kind of quite unique with the work we create, because it is kind of down to what role do you want to do. And just earlier I was thinking of the last 3 podcast briefs we had, and one was growing the awareness of a retail brand, one was welcoming students when they start at university, and kind of a bit of a well-being piece, and then another one is an internal comms podcast for a large corporate client. 3 completely different ways and different jobs, really, of kind of how you can get those 3 audiences. So I think for us, you certainly have to look at what's the end role, what do you want that piece to do, and there's so many different ways you can then attack it. I don't think there is one approach kind of for us, really, to tackle that problem.
So that's in terms of channels, but what's the starting point? Where would I start if I'm an agency owner and I want to start to invest in content marketing?
I was going to say that I think you have to make a decision as to whether you're going to do it in-house or whether you're going to use somebody externally to create that content. I mean, Amy mentioned a really key word with any content earlier, which is consistency. So if you are going to be creating your own content to promote your agency, you must be consistent. So don't just do it once. Make sure you're doing it. Make sure you've identified what you're creating content for. But if you do it in-house, don't just appoint somebody within the team to do it as a bit of an afterthought. Upskill them, because anybody can write, but there's writing, and then there's good writing, and there's good content creation. So if you are going to make somebody responsible for that, or a number of people responsible for that within your team, spend some time investing in them and getting them to understand the behavioral science element of content creation, tone of voice, how important tone of voice actually is, because a lot of times a tone of voice document might be created either by an agency or maybe for their clients, and then gets completely shelved and never looked at again. And that's a utterly useless piece of work. If you have a tone of voice that you've identified, use it consistently across everything, whether it's been the content on your website, whether it's your email content, whether it's your social posts. Make sure that is consistent so that you can see what your brand is about. People can see that and they can understand it. But really, one thing I would suggest is anybody who is starting to create content regularly, a really good way of becoming a better content creator is consume other people's content. So read widely. Make sure you do that on either a daily, or spend some time in the week, put some time aside in the week to consume as much different types of content as possible, because you will become a better content creator and a better writer, because you'll start to understand what works, what doesn't work, what engages you, what doesn't engage you. So any writer, even if you're a novelist, will always be a better writer the more they read. So I would say read as much as you can, and that just consume as much as you can, and you will become better at it.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's been my advice to David Morley, which is he needs to sign up for TikTok.
I was just going to add to that to say, well, a couple of things really, Stephen. So you were saying about agencies that perhaps are creating content for their clients, but not creating content themselves. I think, I guess my view is that you have to practice what you preach, and you have to show yourself, you have to create the content that you create for your clients. So I once met somebody who was like an Instagram coach who didn't have a very big following on Instagram, didn't have much content, didn't have much engagement. And their excuse was, we're just so busy doing so well for our clients that we don't actually do it for ourselves. And I don't think people really buy that. I think if you are doing it for your clients, you should be doing it for yourself. You should practice what you preach. So you do need to be creating content if you're a content agency. I think in terms of where you get started, my best advice is, so do a brainstorming session with your team, either the whole team, leadership team, or break up into different groups and come up with 52 questions that you frequently get asked as a business, what your customers and your clients ask all the time. And that's 52 pieces of content, and that's 1 year's worth of content, because put something every single week out, going through those 52 questions and answering them. In terms of the format, you need to get the sweet spot between the kind of content that you're confident creating and the content that you know your audience consume. So if you love to speak and you want to create podcasts because you're going to be confident with that, but your audience don't consume podcasts, that's not going to work. So find what your audience likes to consume and make sure that you also get content that you enjoy. If you hate being on video, but you know your audience consume video, still don't do video, because you hate being on it, you're going to hate doing it. It's going to become a chore and you're not going to be consistent. So find that content that works. If you are comfortable on camera, do video content, because that is the top of the content pyramid. Because from video content, you can write blog posts based on the video. You can extract the audio and produce a podcast episode. You can create teaser videos to go on all the social platforms. You can pull quotes out of the video and create visual content. You have the main video that can go on different platforms as well. So that's like the top of the pyramid. But that's only if you're comfortable with that. Otherwise, go for blogging, go for podcasting, go for whatever suits you, and just develop that plan. You have your 52 questions, and as also just to say, you have to think of this like a journalist. It's not what you want to tell people, it's what people need to hear. So if you have a audience that want to start a podcast, and you want to put posts out like what's the best microphone and things like that, but actually no one's ever asked you that. All they ever ask you is, how long will it take me to make money? How do I get a sponsor? And all those questions. Then don't put the content out about the best mic, because they don't want to actually hear that, even though you're desperate to tell them. Answer the questions that they want to hear in your content. And then when you're moving them along from cold to warm to hot, then they'll start to want to know like the additional type of content. So, quite a long-winded answer, but choose your platform, brainstorm with your teams, get loads of questions that people ask, create content to answer those questions, choose a format that you are comfortable with so you can be consistent, and then repurpose that content across lots of different platforms, and you'll be on to a winner with your content strategy.
That's very clear. So good news to all of you animators, production companies, videographers and so on. That's clearly, obviously, a growing and very important medium, as we all know. Other thought around that too is back to Mark Stonham's question earlier on about asking the audience. Again, Amy, what you're saying there is basically research. Understand what your customers want. Internalize it too. Understand what the team are being asked day in, day out, and then produce your content strategy from that, and then choose the channels which actually you feel most comfortable in performing in. I guess also there's rules in terms of training and development. There's insights to be done around media training and thoughts around that too. So all of those things need to be considered. But I guess the outtake for me today is historically, I think agencies have actually given it to the most junior person in the team to be responsible for being the content person. That's a huge responsibility for anyone's shoulders, particularly people who haven't necessarily got a huge amount of experience. Instinct tells me they're automatically understanding of the medium, because they spend probably proportionately more time on social, and they've grown up with it in a very much digital, data-driven world. But it does seem a huge responsibility to place on those young shoulders, and something that we all, as owners of agencies, need to be more considerate of and provide the appropriate training. Okay, we've got 4 minutes to go. I just wanted to thank everybody for attending this week, and also thank our panel. It's been a really, really interesting session. Lots of very interesting insights. Thank you to Charlie, Rebecca, Amy, Gavin, and Johnny. Next week, it's the turn again of the Pimento Business Development Club, or the BD Club, as Paddy Woods calls it. This week, Paddy is going to be, or next week, Paddy is going to be guesting with Adam Rubins and Owen Cato from a newly formed agency management consultancy called Now New Why. Now What Why, sorry, get that right. And they'll be looking at agency propositions and how to land yours better. That's 11 a.m. next Wednesday. It's a members event only, but if you would like to attend and you're not a Pimento member, please do drop me a line at my email address, which is stephen.knight@pimento.co.uk. And then our next 5 p.m. club is next Thursday, and this time it will be hosted by Stan. They're an integrated and strategic communications consultancy that specialises in PR, digital, social media, insight, strategy, and positioning. So we'll get the chance to ask them about their own content strategy. And they back organisations from any sector that believe in better, who feel there's always more to be done. And then by challenging the way that people think, feel, and act, they help clients create a meaningful change. So very much focused on creating purposeful conversations for their clients and engagement around that. So again, that should be a good session. They're always fun, those ones, and a lot less formal, and we get the chance to break out into teams and get to meet other members. Isabel's just posted on the chat box there the registration for that if you'd like to join. That'd be great to have you. And as I say, that event is open to members and guests and so on. So thank you once again, everybody. We're going to finish on time for once. I'd like to thank all of our content providers and for all you listeners and for your engagement today. Really good session, and I look forward to seeing you soon. And if I don't see you, look forward to reading your content.